In the book of Exodus, we see the story of God's people, and we see the story of Moses. And God's people are in slavery. They're captives in Egypt. And Moses, he is the unlikely servant. We see Moses adopted at birth. He becomes a prince in Egypt. But he sees the slavery that his people are in. He sees the harsh way that they are treated by the Egyptians. And one day he retaliates and kills an Egyptian guard. At the point where we think the people will hail Moses as their champion, the people reject him, and he flees Egypt and becomes a shepherd. Whilst there, God calls him, and he speaks to Moses in the burning bush. And so that's our first one, that we see Moses as the unlikely servant. Secondly, Moses is God's champion. He's the one who comes to rescue the Hebrews. And God sends Moses to Pharaoh to be the champion of the people, to demand their freedom from Egypt, one of the greatest empires of all time. And eventually, through God's power, the Hebrews are released. Pharaoh lets them go, but he turns back on his promises. And by the time that the Hebrews have reached the Red Sea, Pharaoh's army has caught up with them. And it's at this point that the Hebrews begin to doubt, and they begin to complain, and they're not sure what's going to happen. But Moses says, "Be still and trust God." And it's at this point that we see Moses holding up the rod, stretching out his hands, and the Red Sea parts, and the Hebrews escape. So our second point was that Moses is God's champion. And thirdly, Moses is the mediator, the man who stands between the people and God. You see, when the Hebrews reached the desert, they'd reached Mount Sinai, and there God was to be seen. The whole mountain was a terrible sight, an awesome sight. And the Hebrews were so scared, they were terrified. They didn't know what to do. They cry out to Moses, "We can't go up there, don't let us go. Don't let us face God in all his holiness. We couldn't stand before him." They say, "You go instead of us. You speak to us. Don't let God speak to us, or we'll die." And so thirdly, we see Moses as the mediator, the man who stands between God and the people and who pleads on behalf of the people. And you see, the story of Exodus, the story of Moses and his people, it doesn't finish there. It's not about Moses. It's the Bible, the whole Bible, it points to one person, and his shadows are seen across the whole book. The story of Moses points to Jesus Christ. You see, in Jesus Christ, we see the unlikely servant. The one, God's Son, who didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but instead he chose to come as a servant. He chose to be born into this world as a vulnerable baby. And he came as the unlikely servant. He washed his disciples' feet. And here was God's Son bending down, ultimately under the weight of a cross. And so our second point is that Jesus was God's true champion, God's true rescuer. Jesus stretched his hands on the cross, where Moses stretched his hand and the Red Seas parted, Jesus, his hands were stretched on a cross, and our sin parts. There's a song that says, as far as the east is from the west, that is how far God has removed our sins from us, because he placed them on Jesus. And our third point, just like we saw Moses mediating between the people and God, Jesus, the true mediator, or like in the book of Hebrews in the Bible, it says, the great high priest, the great one who stands before God and the people. You see, as Christians, we don't worship a founder who is still dead. We don't follow a person who died and is buried. As Christians, we believe Jesus Christ is raised from the dead, and that he lives today, and that he's ascended and is before God right now, and that whoever puts their faith in him, who believes in his name, he pleads on their behalf. He brings them before God. And so if we put our faith in him, we're seen as God's children, just as Jesus is his son. So the Bible isn't just a book about different characters, different individuals by themselves. The Bible is one big story of God coming to rescue his people, and of the true champion, the true mediator, Jesus Christ.